Ferrus Manus, the Gorgon, Primarch of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands, is the least loved of all the Primarchs, both by the Warhammer community and by Games Workshop. But that doesn't mean that he isn't awesome, as he's actually a very interesting character and quite powerful. It isn't necessarily his fault, as someone had to be the first to die among the 18 or 19 or is it 21 brothers, the demigod sons of the Emperor of Mankind, the Primarchs. And that is what he is best known for, both in the setting and here in the real world. Ferrus Manus is known for, is in fact famous for, losing his head to Fulgrim, his best friend, during the Dropsite Massacre on Istvaan V. But what if I told you that it was actually all his own fault and was completely 100% avoidable? For if Ferrus hadn't been so inflexible, then he might have succeeded where he failed. He might have kept his head on his shoulders, and perhaps even taken Fulgrim's in turn. Now, Ferrus was indeed a Primarch, and one of the most consummate warriors ever produced by humanity, but on Istvaan V, he was facing the one being in the universe that he truly had kinship with, his best bro, his best friend. Ferrus didn't want to truly kill Fulgrim in his heart, but he knew it was his duty, and he tried his hardest to do so. But the tragic irony is that Fulgrim didn't want to dispatch his brother, but to convince him. The demon he was possessed by took control, and Fulgrim did something which could never be taken back, crossed a threshold from which he could never emerge again. He beheaded his brother. And much to his chagrin and sorrow, as Fulgrim, even to this day, has never fully been able to forgive himself for that single act of treachery. But surely there's more to Ferrus Manus than just this one defining moment where he lost his head and his life, setting his legion on a dark path of depression and overcompensation. And there is, but it is much less than the lore that we can find on his brothers, excepting of course the Lost Two, the Forgotten, and the Purged. And this may just be the main curse that Ferrus Manus suffers from, that he is mostly defined by the community and Games Workshop as the Primarch who died, the Primarch who lost his head, the death that set the stage for just how tragic the Horus Heresy was going to be. For it is in the very first book in which he appears that the Lord of the 10th Legion, the Iron Hands, dies. Book 5 of the Horus Heresy series, titled appropriately Fulgrim, is both our introduction and our outro for the Gorgon. So in honor of Ferrus, who is traditionally my least favorite of all the Primarchs and always has been, we're going to take a look at just who he was, what motivated him, and what redeeming qualities he had. For with this Primarch it can be said that he is very out of touch with his legion, and the Iron Hands and Ferrus Manus were often not on the same page. We cannot hold the Primarch to account for the sins of his sons, as he was not there, and for the brief time he was among them, he disapproved of their weirdo cult behavior and their obsession with cybernetic and bionic enhancements. So when we look at the character, the flaws, strengths, emotions, mindset, etc., I think one of the most revealing stories we can read is Feet of Iron by Nick Kyme. I know this story gets a lot of flack and it is polarizing, but I feel that it is pretty perfect as Ferrus Manus does that himself, so it is a natural fit. The Iron Hands are deployed on an Exodite world alongside the Salamanders and the Death Guard. Ferrus Manus has an inner dialogue running throughout the story that makes him seem like he suffers greatly from feelings of incompetence and is desperate not to be perceived as weak. He recalls being introduced to the Imperium, one of the last Primarchs found, with only Alfarius, I believe, still yet to be revealed, and how he is introduced to his 18 brothers, which is interesting as he's recalling the lost Primarchs as well. But he's all about self-image, and like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ferrus Manus is totally ripped and just strength incarnate, yet he feels weak, small, unworthy in the face of so many exceptional brothers. Brothers who have had the chance to show off their skills and abilities to their father and the galaxy at large. Brothers who have already been spilling blood and claiming worlds in the name of their father and the Imperium. It all comes down to Ferrus Manus exuding nothing but an iron will and pure strength at all times. But that's all a front. Inside, he's really insecure. And this leads to Ferrus Manus making bad decisions and doing terrible things. So Vulcan and Mortarion and their respective legions are fighting on other parts of the world. But Ferrus, the Iron Hands, and the Imperial army contingent that they are working with are bogged down in a baking hot, just awful desert. Servitors are fizzling out, tanks are overheating, and men are dying as they march through the blistering heat of the white-hot sun. Even the officers are dehydrated, and these brave souls are giving all they've got. But Ferrus doesn't want to look weak in any way at all in front of his brothers, Vulcan and Mortarion, so he tells his captains that they're pressing on and deliver the news to the Imperial Guard commanders. Now, Gabriel Santar and other captains of the Iron Hands know that to press on will be possibly only for the Astartes and the few remaining men of the Guard force who are still capable of fighting, but it will mean leaving men and vehicles to die in the desert, just being utterly abandoned. And Ferrus just flat out doesn't care, because to care would be to show what he perceives as weakness. He could have really used a lesson from his brother Sanguinius on this topic, but yeah, he put how he'll be perceived in front of the lives of hundreds of loyal servants of the Emperor, leaving them to die horribly, baked to death on the desert sand. Nobody thought it was a good idea, but everyone was worried about telling Ferrus Manus that. He proved to be uncompromising, uncaring, unwavering, and wholly deluded by his own self-aggrandizement, falling short of how he aggrandized his brothers. And nobody thought it was a good idea to bring it up to him, and nobody wanted to suffer his wrath. So as they proceeded, they finally get to a valley and enter it, but it soon becomes a narrow ravine with steep, high walls on both sides. Ferrus straight up knows that it is definitely a trap, and he doesn't want to scout the area ahead of time as they don't have a dedicated scout company with them, nor does he want to wait for the Imperial Guard to catch up with them and use their scouts, as that will take time. And he's in that big hurry to get to where he's going and provide assistance to Vulcan and the Salamanders in the jungle. So with their vehicles failing and their forces divided and half of them dying, their fighting strength severely reduced, Ferrus Manus orders the Iron Hands and their auxiliaries into the ravine, while of course they get engulfed in a psychically produced storm that comes from out of nowhere and turns the sky black, and they are then in a fight for their lives. Ferrus had been warned that the Eldar were using witchcraft against them, and that moving forward would be unwise, but then again he was in a hurry, so disregarded that completely. He stated that to cower to that would be showing weakness, and he stated that reacting to it at all would be to acknowledge it. The best show of strength in his mind was to just proceed on and be undaunted by it, and to crush the Eldar under their power-armored boots. Ferrus was acting like a total fool, completely undisciplined and completely rash, only concerned with one thing: being perceived as strong. It went beyond obsession with him. It was all-consuming. So the Eldar's trap bogs down the Iron Hands with vicious fighting, and it gets really bad. People are dying left and right, Eldar aspect warriors are engaging them in close combat, howling banshees are cutting them down, and Ferrus is swallowed by the storm. As he rushed ahead trying to just clobber his way through the Eldar host, eventually the Iron Hands are able to target the Farseer who is causing the storm, and they find that Ferrus Manus is just gone. His footprints literally just disappear, and the trail goes cold. They know he was abducted. So they split into multiple forces, one led by Gabriel Santar to look for Ferrus Manus, along with 50 Terminators, and one led by Shadrach Medusan, who is put in charge of the main force and is to proceed on. There is a lot going on with the side characters, and there are some serious metaphors used. We get to understand that the bionics the Iron Hands rely on so heavily are no strength for them at all, but in this case, one of the biggest hindrances they have, as the Eldar are able to deploy a weapon that makes their bionics either cease to function, or in some cases, literally turn on themselves. Marines with any kind of cybernetic augmentation are left crippled by the very thing that they leaned into for strength. Those with eye implants went blind, those with bionic legs could not walk, etc. They were absolutely screwed, and the Eldar were keeping them busy. But that was all a distraction, as they were just trying to buy time for their Farseers to manipulate Ferrus Manus. The Gorgon was having his own insane trip, as he found himself in a chamber, a throne room, with an ancient, undead, rotting corpse of a king on a giant throne in front of him. He did not recognize it as a vision of his father, or rather what his father would become. He was still at that point completely unaware of the existence of the Golden Throne. This was the height of the Great Crusade, and he had a lot of catching up to do to be seen as the equal of any of his brothers. Yes, Ferrus is still feeling insecure that he was found so late and got to achieve so little compared to the likes of Horus, Russ, and even Fulgrim. Now, one of the themes of this story is how dismissive Ferrus Manus is of all the obvious things going on around him. From the moment he set foot in the desert, he was uneasy and just wanted to leave. He had a terrible dream, actually a nightmare, which was 100% just a prescient vision of the events to come at Istvaan V, when his brother Fulgrim would take his head. He dismissed the dream, telling himself there was only weakness in dwelling on it. Everything came down to strength and weakness with Ferrus. Everything. So he dismissed the dream, which is actually a prescient vision, but he lets it get under his skin so bad that he's willing to sacrifice hundreds, possibly thousands of his unaugmented Imperial troops to die in the desert, just so he can keep moving forward, as it kept his mind off his terrible vision. Ferrus then dismisses that Eldar witchcraft is being employed against him and his legion, blowing it off as if it were mere parlor tricks. For after all, in the mind of the Primarch, everyone and everything was beneath him, except his brothers and his father, and no weakling Xenos was going to delay the progress of him and his legion. The narcissism and insecurity with this one is extreme, and I mean it is really bad. So bad, in fact, that he's blinded by it metaphorically at first, but literally eventually as the story progresses. But the thing that Ferrus Manus dismisses most is a burning, itching, aching pain in his neck. He's having that prescient awareness of his own inevitable beheading at the hands of Fulgrim, striking him so hard it is literally chafing his collar. The guy is physically uncomfortable, develops a stress rash. He really needed some hydrocortisone cream. The Eldar that the Iron Hands are facing seem to be working with other Xenos, of which the Iron Hands knew little to nothing, yet they slew them nonetheless. This, combined with the conversation between the Eldar Farseers, tells me that it is the Cabal at work here. And this event with Ferrus Manus of the Iron Hands was their first attempt to recruit a Primarch into their schemes. Before they ever turned their gaze upon Alfarius Omegon, they tried to reason with Ferrus Manus. But instead of just talking to him, which wouldn't have worked because of his raging xenophobia and hatred, and anger, are we sure this guy's not on steroids? They tried to manipulate him with visions of the future. Bad move, wrong move. So, Ferrus is before the decrepit king, which is all a staged vision from the Farseers to manipulate him, but they accidentally let in something they didn't quite mean to, and they specifically refer to it as an aspect of the primordial annihilator. So it is a being of chaos, and it takes the form of the great serpent Asternoth that Ferrus slew on Medusa, which was actually a Necron construct, but is where Ferrus got his living metal hands and eyes from. Wrestling with the monster is all just symbolic of Ferrus wrestling with his inner demons, but it manages to bite him and poison him. He loses Forgebreaker from his grip and is at a disadvantage. He goes blind and must trust his intuition, pulling a blade that he carried as a backup melee weapon, a sword forged by none other than the Salamander's Primarch Vulcan himself. Ferrus manages to cut away the necrodermis on his arm and open the wound beneath to let the venom out. He's all but spent, but it brings relief. His throat is itching like crazy, but he's getting back to his senses. Eventually, he grasps the great serpent by the throat, intent on choking it to death, using all his incredible might. But it shapeshifts in his hands. He's been tormented by a disembodied voice, coming neither from the serpent nor the undead giant skeleton king on the throne. It keeps saying, "Angel Exterminatus." So the serpent has become his brother Fulgrim, or halfway to becoming him, when Ferrus just smashes him and is like, "Enough!" He remembers that he's a warrior king, that the flesh is weak but deeds endure. And Ferrus smashes the undead king off the throne and tears it down, basically pulling down the curtain and revealing the Wizard of Oz behind it in the form of the two Eldari Farseers. Ferrus Manus keeps obsessing over the fact that he's a warrior king, saying out loud to the Eldar several times and also to himself a few in his thoughts. He's completely just like, smash everything, and totally not willing to understand that they were trying to save him from a horrific fate. Or so they think at first because of their Xenos hubris. Ferrus didn't care if their visions were true or not. He proclaimed that he was a Primarch, a warrior, a king, a prince of the galaxy under his father the Emperor, but above all, that he was human. and he didn't like being lied to and manipulated. But what Ferrus failed to realize was that it would have taken more strength in the end to have listened, to have tried to understand, than it did to oppose the Eldar. He demanded that he be let go, and they conceded. But first he let them know that he was a warrior, and as such, he expected to die, one day or another, which is really interesting as he told himself while strangling the serpent as it became fulgrim in his hands, that of course it would take him to slay that beast, as only a Primarch could kill another Primarch. So he's telling the Eldar that it is both okay with him and expected that he'd fall in battle one day, and that is also his preferred method to meet this inevitability. But he told himself that only a Primarch can kill another Primarch, which is very telling. Ferrus knows the fate he will meet and marches on to meet it nonetheless, without hesitation. In fact, when Istvaan V's Dropsite Massacre happened, he charged in so heedlessly, he got himself and his legion's leadership all killed, because Ferrus was so obsessed with being seen as strong, as being never seen as weak, especially in comparison to his siblings, that he'd sacrifice anything, including his own legion and his own life. Ferrus Manus was truly always, in his own way, a lost cause, stubborn to the last and loyal to a fault, yet so insecure and worthless feeling inside. It is truly tragic. He literally lived in the shadow of those who turned out to be lesser men than he, and I'm referring to Primarchs here. One of the most telling things about the mentality of the Primarch and how it had affected the culture of the Iron Hands Legion, long before they had to deal with his untimely loss, is just how fanatical they were with trying to emulate him, and did so in a failed facsimile of his necrodermic appendages by amputating their own hands, even though they were fine. Not because of wounds, but because they thought the flesh is weak, and they wanted to be like Ferrus. So the 7th Sergeant of the 10th Company, Bion Henricos, comes up with a plan when the Eldar were whooping them up, and using tech that disabled and confused their bionics, he detaches his one bionic, as he only had the hand, and leads some of the surviving regular humans against the Eldar successfully. But even though Henricus saved the day for the Iron Hands, his superiors were all about how he may be punished, possibly even executed, for ignoring the Legion's creed, for taking off his bionic hand and using his flesh. These guys need to understand the riddle of steel. But Ferrus Manus' mentality, his paranoia and insecurity, all hidden behind that rough exterior, are what led to his demise and the degradation of his legion. In some ways, he's one of the more human Primarchs that way. And it would have been interesting to have seen what he could have done alongside the Cabal instead of Alpharius, Omegon, and the Alpha Legion. Alas, we'll never know, and he never told his legion what happened, so it is lost to the universe other than the Eldar. The great revelations of his death and the treachery of his best friend and brother Fulgrim, the shattering of the Legion at Istvaan V, the possible futures he was shown, he shared none of that, exclaiming that nothing of importance happened while he was away fighting the Eldar witches. He just demanded that they get back underway and hightail it to the jungle with whatever forces they had left because he didn't want to leave Vulcan waiting. That would have been seen as weakness, and there was no room for weakness in the heart of Ferrus Manus or in his legion, because the flesh is weak, but deeds endure.